I want to speak to you about a new organization called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. We stand firmly against the war on science that is predicated on the appeal to nature fallacy, which is the belief that whatever is natural must be good and whatever is unnatural must be bad. This belief has become an impediment to advances in areas such as human health, social progress, and even environmental progress. In the field of medicine, the appeal to nature fallacy has already led to catastrophic outcomes. Resistance to vaccines threatens public health and the lives of children. The unwarranted resistance to GMOs has not only held back the fight against climate change, but it has also hampered our ability to feed the developing world as well. Campaigns against GMOs have also held back efforts to ward off the deadly Aedes aegypti mosquito, which has killed countless millions as a carrier of disease and plagues. The scientific consensus concerning the safety of GMOs is solidly supported in every major scientific organization across the planet. The only thing green about being anti-GMO is the extra cash that is made by overcharging for expensive boutique food. But that won't cut it when it comes to raising crops with accelerating heat stress, droughts, floods, disease, and insect infestations brought on by a hotter planet. It makes no sense to accept the call of the IPCC for decarbonization within the next 12 years and yet reject their conclusion that these goals are impossible without nuclear power, which has proven itself to be the cleanest, safest, and most reliable way of achieving decarbonization. It is the most reliable way to decarbonize simply because the alternatives of weather-dependent power sources are inherently unreliable. And nuclear is the cleanest energy source because it is the only form of energy production that completely encases its waste stream. Super safe, advanced Generation 4 reactors, which will almost completely convert existing nuclear waste to centuries worth of energy, are coming very close to commercialization. In fact, it goes completely against most everything we're led to believe, but nuclear is legitimately the safest form of energy generation according to all the accepted worldwide energy fatality data. But there is one thing that nuclear is not safe for, and that is the fossil fuel industry. The fact of the matter is that the fossil fuel industry has a long history of funding the anti-nuclear movement, along with climate change deniers, to protect their bottom line. Solid science is in dire need of a champion. And that is what eco-modernism is all about. Eco-modernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in general. Ecology-based modernism is the most direct way to define it. Eco-modernism as a philosophy is described in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto. We believe humanity should not be rejecting technological progress, but rather separate our impacts from nature through the responsible use of technology and urbanization. Urbanization is an unstoppable worldwide trend and the best solution to many environmental problems. It offers sustainable development for the human population and is a historic antidote to both deforestation and species extinction, as humans move away from using wildlife as their protein source. Vertical, urban, high-rise architecture minimizes the use of land, resources, and energy, enabling walkable cities that facilitates the more efficient use of mass public transit as well. It must be emphasized that our support for technological solutions is definitely not about defending industrial polluters, nor do we accept funding from corporations or industry. Nor does our defense of technology imply that we just need to sit back and let things take care of themselves. To the contrary, we believe that humanity is at a crossroads that severely threatens our future on this planet. We reject the idea of resource limits on many levels. The advance of science has a long history of getting around problems of resource scarcity and will continue to do so. Another reason is that Earth is just one of a multitude of worlds available to explore in our solar system and beyond. Comets and asteroids are untapped reservoirs for raw materials. If we could find a way to thrive in artificial ecosystems off-world, we could use what we learn to help sustain terrestrial ecosystems here on Earth. I hope by now you understand the worthiness of our cause. Ecomodernism is really only a philosophy at this time. I want to talk to you about the necessity of turning it into a movement, which will be part of the larger environmentalist movement. For it is only through our presence and participation that there can be any hope of moving environmentalism in the right direction. Our aim is not to divide the environmental movement, but rather to multiply its numbers with the incorporation of many scientific and educational communities that is working to both build chapters of eco-modernist societies and support our growth worldwide. We aspire to increase our numbers by bringing together the numerous supporters of climate action that have been alienated by mainstream environmentalism's wildly contradictory support for the shutting down of nuclear power plants in the midst of a climate emergency, and welcome them into our ranks. Thank you.
Please subscribe to us on YouTube, EcoModern channel. Also to subscribe to us on Twitter and Facebook, EcoModern Society of North America.
What is your name? Do you want to go fishing? Do you want to play? Heading out the sun today, they say, just to feel the rain. Heading out at noon.
I want to speak to you about a new organization called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. We stand firmly against the war on science that is predicated on the appeal to nature fallacy, which is the belief that whatever is natural must be good and whatever is unnatural must be bad. This belief has become an impediment to advances in areas such as human health, social progress, and even environmental progress. In the field of medicine, the appeal to nature fallacy has already led to catastrophic outcomes. Resistance to vaccines threatens public health and the lives of children. The unwarranted resistance to GMOs has not only held back the fight against climate change, but it has also hampered our ability to feed the developing world as well. Campaigns against GMOs have also held back efforts to ward off the deadly Aedes aegypti mosquito, which has killed countless millions as a carrier of disease and plagues. The scientific consensus concerning the safety of GMOs is solidly supported in every major scientific organization across the planet. The only thing green about being anti-GMO is the extra cash that is made by overcharging for expensive boutique food. But that won't cut it when it comes to raising crops with accelerating heat stress, droughts, floods, disease, and insect infestations brought on by a hotter planet. It makes no sense to accept the call of the IPCC
on another planet with 29 moons. There is a spirit like me and you, stretching across the universe, connecting me and you. Electromagnetic worlds.
Hello and welcome. This is a special edition of the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. I am Carl Pauls, and I'm here with our special guest, Amy Lang Kawamura. Amy has lived in Fukushima City since 2006. She comes from the United States, and she is an author who writes children's literature. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, Carl. Thank you for having me here today.
Yeah, thanks for the discussion. And just to, if anyone from Amy's world wants to know, I have been a nuclear advocate for about a decade, and recently I was fortunate enough to join the digital engineering team at TerraPower, and we are building a new advanced nuclear plant in Kemmerer, Wyoming. And I do not represent the views of my employer, TerraPower. I am, the treasurer of the Eco-Modernist Society of North America, and we are a small part of the nuclear advocacy, not industry, because we're very, very low funded. If you want to support us, you can donate to us at the Eco-Modernist channel on patreon.com. So,
And
with that-
likewise, I only represent myself.
Yeah. Amy and I were backstage comparing our dosimeters. Let's see. I've got a better.
Mine is
Mhm. Go ahead.
0.18 microsieverts. And right now I'm sitting in my home in Fukushima City.
Yeah.
0.19 microsieverts per hour.
Mhm.
So what's yours?
Mine is it's gone between 0.12, oh there it is, 0.11 and 0.19 microsieverts per hour. And this is in the basement in King County, just outside Seattle.
So we're about the same. Yay!
Yeah, that's good.
This is the guy's going back in the drawer.
Yeah, and I'm going to save the battery on mine. it has fancy batteries. So, um,
So can I introduce myself?
yeah, tell us more about yourself.
Okay, my name's Amy, and Lang is my American family's name. Kawamura is my husband's family name. And I met my husband in the United States in the 90s. I moved to Japan in 1995. First, we lived in Chiba Prefecture, which is near Tokyo. It's in the it's east of Tokyo. And in 2006, we came to Fukushima Prefecture. We moved here, and this is my home. And at that time, when we moved here, we had a son who was about 3 years old. So that was during the time when, if I had said Fukushima to probably you or most people around the world, they would have gone like, huh? Because at that time, people didn't know what it meant outside of Japan. Of course, Japanese people knew what Fukushima meant, what Fukushima means, but outside of Japan, people really didn't know what it meant. And so I don't know how much your viewers know about the geography of Japan, but I have a map here on this eco bag. And this is Tohoku. Do you know what Tohoku is? If I say Tohoku, you
I've
know what
heard
that
of
means?
that. Isn't that is that another prefecture or is that a city?
It's neither. It's neither. So there are regions.
Ah,
It is like the Midwest part of America. What are you in the
I'm Pacific Northwest.
right? Pacific Northwest, South. There's different regions. And electricity wise, this is a region. So it has its own power company, Tohoku Power Company. Including Tohoku Power Company is also Niigata, which is outside of Tohoku, but it also is part of Tohoku. So Tohoku is right here. Down here is Tokyo. There's Ibaraki, which is a prefecture. It's quite long. And then Tokyo, Chiba, and Tokyo. So from my point of view, Tokyo is quite far away. I know a lot of people think of Tokyo and Fukushima Daiichi as really close. But from my point of view, I feel like it's quite far.
Yeah.
And we're not in the same region. And so this area is called Tohoku. And historically, I would think of it as like Appalachia in the United States.
Hmm.
Historically, it was one of the poorest areas, if not the poorest area. I'm going to leave Okinawa out of that because Okinawa is really the poorest part of Japan. But excluding Okinawa, it was. I don't know if it is as much today, but when Fukushima Daiichi was built, it was definitely the poorest region of Japan, like all of Japan, excluding Okinawa. And so the feeling of this area is like Appalachia. It has a lot of mountains, a lot of tough people, rugged type people. My husband is from Tohoku. He's not from Fukushima, but he is from Tohoku, which makes him a Tohoku boy. Have you heard of Otani Shohei?
No, I haven't.
You haven't heard of Shohei Otani? He's from
No.
Tohoku.
Okay.
He's from Tohoku. He's a baseball player. So, like, one of the best baseball players in America right now is from Tohoku. So it's there, Anyway, it's a great place, and I really like Tohoku. But it's important to make to distinguish between Tohoku and the Tokyo region, which is further south,
Mhm.
because culturally they're different. Like New York City and Appalachia aren't the same, right? For Americans. So this is more similar to Appalachia in the United States. Not exactly the same, but similar. And New York City and Tokyo would be similar, right? So I wanted to let people know that they are two different areas and they have two different power companies. So here's my map of Fukushima Prefecture. And I live here, Fukushima City. This area was where the nuclear power plant was built. I apologize. Tokyo Electric Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant was built here.
Mhm.
And it opened in 1971. Do you have any questions?
Is Daiichi is just south of that. Fukushima Daiichi is just a little bit south of that, right?
It's not, well, it is a little bit, but it's actually not in the same town. It's a
Right.
different town.
Yeah, it is a different town. And different sort of construction geography. Like it's a different each of these power stations experienced similar conditions, is that right?
I don't know much about Daiichi,
Okay.
Fukushima Daiichi. I don't know much about that. I mean, when I'm getting ahead of myself, but when on March 11th, I didn't even know we lived near a nuclear power plant. I didn't know we had nuclear power plants. I didn't think about it.
Mhm.
I just didn't even think about it. So, the thing is, though, I mean, what we need to know about Fukushima. Well, I don't know. Maybe you need to know more as somebody who's really into it. But Fukushima Daiichi did not melt down, and Fukushima Daiichi did. I'm reading Khan's memoirs, and he actually said that there was a worry that Daiichi might melt down. I don't
Yeah.
know how serious it was. I
It-
don't know.
It,
Don't
it
know.
was fairly serious. And from my understanding of the disaster of the the tidal wave, the tsunami, did affect that plant in a very serious manner, much more serious than it did not affect the Tohoku power plant, like the one that was further north and closer to the earthquake. I believe that's the right name for that plant.
Yeah. Oh, Onagawa. Onagawa is
thank you.
Tohoku Electric.
Yeah, the Onagawa plant was greater in elevation, had a proper seawall, had very good reinforcement of all its structures, and Daiichi, Fukushima Daiichi,
And Daiichi and Daiichi both.
mhm, they both suffered. Maybe Daiichi suffered worse and had older equipment and did not have an easily restored electrical system, and Daiichi was able to have its electrical connection restored, which prevented that meltdown. And so, of perhaps 10 reactors, 3 melted down, and the other, and maybe 4 or 5 of the other 7 were vulnerable but were saved.
Yeah, I don't know how close any of them came, like at Daiichi, I don't know. But at Daiichi, 3 melted down. And there were, I learned this from Simon, hydrogen explosions
Yeah.
at, I think, 3. But what's interesting, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Can I go back to the 60s?
Yeah, let's go back to the construction. Why were they made in such a way that this was even possible, and how?
Oh, first of all, okay. During the 50s, Fukushima had coal. Okay.
Mhm.
I just visited the coast and I went to the coal museum. I went to the old coal mines. So the economy ran on, I don't know if the entire economy. I mean, this was a very poor area. I was reading a woman's book and she's Japanese American and her mother grew up in the Fukushima area during like the 50s and the 60s. Her mom like said during the winter her hands were just always cold because I mean Japan then wasn't the same Japan today, right? And so the people of Tohoku were, many of them were just very, very poor, right? So they needed jobs. They had jobs in coal, and that was no longer being a thing that they could depend on. And so Tokyo Electric wanted to build a nuclear power plant. And so it was looking for places. This is my opinion. And what I'm going to say next is my own personal opinion. I don't think that Tokyo Electric wanted a nuclear power plant near Tokyo. So they made it about as close as they could while still being really, 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 really far away. Do you understand what I mean? Like as far
Right.
away as they could while still being close. I mean, it's not in Chiba, it's not in Ibaraki. It's all the way up in Fukushima, which isn't the same region. And So that's an important point because I think a lot of times with nuclear power plants, they serve the region around them, right? Of the people who actually live there. But in our case, while it provided jobs, it didn't actually serve us. It wasn't our nuclear power plant, it was Tokyo's nuclear power plant. So anyway, Fukushima agreed to let the nuclear power plant be built for jobs. And I think that's the usual reason, right? People need jobs. So it was agreed that it could be built in Fukushima Prefecture. Why did they choose that particular spot? I've watched old documentaries. Well, they're not documentaries. They were more like I don't want to say like advertising videos from the 60s. And at that time, if they were in black and white, they probably would have been showed in a movie theater because most Japanese people wouldn't have had a TV set. So they were explaining to the Japanese public about this new nuclear power plant that was going to be built and how it's going to be so safe and there isn't anything to worry about. So, and it's in Japanese and it's on YouTube. There's like 2 videos and they're each about an hour long. So I can understand Japanese. So I listened to both of them. So, something important to remember is first of all, Tohoku and Japan, I keep saying Tohoku. Tokyo Electric didn't actually build a nuclear power plant. You know that, right?
Yeah.
And Japan didn't build the nuclear power plant. GE, which is an American company, built the nuclear power plant. So whenever people say, like, why did they do it? I don't think that they is only Japan. It's like, why did GE do it? Why did Tokyo Electric do it? Why did Japan do it? I don't think there's one. I don't know who made these decisions. But anyway, in the video, it shows, workers taking earthquake tests. And they're saying in Japanese, oh, well, we tested this area and it's really very stable. There aren't any earthquakes here. And I don't know how much that's true. It probably was true in the 50s or 60s. Probably there weren't very many earthquakes. Certain parts of Japan, and you live in Washington. Is it Washington State?
Right.
Yes. Sometimes there'll be like 10 years with no earthquakes. And then another 10 years, well, there'll be a lot of earthquakes in a certain area. So in the video that was meant for the Japanese public to watch, it tells how there weren't very many earthquakes in this region. And that's why it was chosen. And then they showed how they were making the ground, they were building it, and you can see that it goes down, down, down. They take all the dirt and they make it, instead of up high on the hill, they bring it down closer to the sea level, which obviously, in hindsight, was a huge, huge, huge mistake. But, I find it really hard to judge what people were doing in the 60s because that was the 60s and all those people have died. They're dead. That was a long time ago. So if a nuclear power plant has been built, there are many years for people to figure out that it's not safe. And I feel like mistakes were made when it was built. Those mistakes could have been fixed, though. From 1971, when it first opened, to 2011, there was a lot of time for those mistakes to be fixed. And they weren't fixed. So anyway, do you have any questions about why it was built in a spot that was vulnerable?
I think from my understanding, it was a money saving. It was simplifying the construction. So if GE bid on this project, then GE would have had an estimate, and they would have probably had to meet that estimate. And yes, in the 60s, under the precursor to the NRC, the AEC, that regulator did not have exactly the same safety culture as the current nuclear regulator in America. And I will admit that a lot of mistakes were made in many plants.
Okay, we can agree on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know who made the mistakes. GE, Tokyo Electric, Japan. And we think one thing we know, though, it was not Fukushima. It was not Fukushima's plant. They didn't build it. What they said was, okay, you can build it here, but they didn't. Fukushima did not build it. It wasn't Fukushima's plant. It was either GE, Tokyo Electric, I suppose the Japanese government. I mean, I don't know who had their hands in it.
Hmm.
But when we say they, I think that's who we're talking about. They meaning GE and I
Right.
suppose Tokyo Electric.
Yeah. And
But I find it hard to judge because, like I said, all those people have passed away. It was a long time ago. There was plenty of time to fix those problems.
yeah, and I think what we can judge is if there's a discussion about these problems, the potential for a future disaster, and those actions weren't taken to avoid disaster, that's when our judgment can start to come in. And from my own experience, even before joining the nuclear industry, I have this hope that a serious condition will be reported and will be acted upon if it needs to be. And unfortunately, it looks like TEPCO was warned about the seismic conditions, and they did not act. They failed to act to correct the problems at Fukushima Daiichi and Fukushima Daini, and possibly other plants that are now shut down.
Yeah, so that's the second thing. I feel like this is my own personal viewpoint, looking at it as like a non-science person. But we all remember in 2004, right? Boxing Day, what happened to countries around the Indian Ocean. I mean, it was devastated by the earthquake and then the tsunami. That tsunami was about the same height as the one that hit the coast of Tohoku. And I don't want to say the coast of Fukushima because Fukushima was not the worst hit. I mean, it wasn't even close to being the worst hit. So it was about the same height. But why did no nuclear power plants melt down in 2004? Because there weren't any. There weren't any nuclear power plants. So that should have been a sign. We people who make the decisions had a sign that something could happen to a nuclear power plant, but they didn't pay attention.
Yeah.
And then it happened again in 2010. You know what happened in 2010? There was another tsunami. Another tsunami. This one hit Chile, and it was also the same size. It was a 9.0 earthquake. It was about the same size, and I've measured them. I've looked at the measurements. It was the highest waves were about the same size as the highest waves of the ones that hit around Indonesia. It hit Indonesia and I suppose Thailand, the different countries, Sri Lanka. So you have two tsunamis that have the ability to wreak havoc on a nuclear power plant, but neither country has a nuclear power plant. So there were no problems as far as nuclear goes. Chile doesn't have a nuclear power plant. So there was no question of there being a meltdown because a nuclear power plant doesn't exist. And Indonesia doesn't have a nuclear power plant. And Sri Lanka doesn't have a nuclear power plant. India does have nuclear power plants, but India's pretty far away, first of all. And second of all, India is pretty shielded by Sri Lanka, if you look at So, I mean, at a certain point, if you get far enough away, the tsunami is not going to be as bad as if, it's really close.
Yeah.
So those were two tsunamis that were both mega. They weren't small, they were mega. So I don't know who I'm talking about when I say the nuclear industry, but I suppose I'm talking about I keep saying that, Tokyo Electric. The people at Tokyo Electric, and by that I mean the managers, the people who worked in Tokyo, they should have looked at the size, at the heights, at the devastation from those two tsunamis in 2004 and 2010 and done tests to see what that would do to their own nuclear power plants. And obviously they didn't. And we know the result.
Yeah.
Yeah, you agree with all that. So can I keep talking?
Question.
No question. I'm ready for you to have questions.
Yeah.
You're like, I have no questions about that. Yeah. So that's where the nuclear industry went wrong. In my opinion, it's like after the airplanes hit the towers in 2001, didn't the nuclear industry stop and think to themselves, what if an airplane were to hit a nuclear power plant? I mean, I remember that.
Yeah.
It was a discussion.
We
And it was decided, I
we
don't know what was done.
well
It was decided that
we had many delays on our new builds after 2001. We
Right.
did not complete a nuclear plant for over a decade, and in fact, the only one that was completed was Watts Bar 2, and then after Fukushima Daiichi, we had delays and we had tests. We had tests including airframe strikes on these containment structures. So yeah, it was a period of reflection for sure.
Well, I'm talking about like after the airplanes hit
Right.
the World Trade Center. The I suppose the people who control what happens at nuclear power plants thought to themselves, what would happen if an airplane were to hit a nuclear power plant? So the
Yeah.
same thing, in my opinion, I don't even think this is an opinion. I think this is just kind of obvious. The same thing should have happened after the tsunami of 2004, and if not then, which it should have happened after 2004, at least by 2010, but it should have
Yeah.
happened after 2004. Every place that has a nuclear power plant should look at the nuclear power plant and think to themselves, what would happen if that tsunami had hit our nuclear power plant? And I mean, especially in the Ring of Fire, especially like, Japan, when you say vulnerable to earthquakes, that's every part of Japan. There's no place in Japan that isn't vulnerable to earthquakes. No place. I mean, you can't like live in Japan without knowing that earthquakes are a possibility. And tsunamis hadn't happened here, not mega tsunamis, but we know they don't happen that often, but they do happen.
Yeah.
The thing is, they happen more often than people who act like they don't happen. They happen more often than those people act like they do, but they also don't happen like every day or anything. So, but they do happen. There's several mega tsunamis every century. But because, they're spread out over years, it's not like people think about them. Or they hit a place that isn't very populated. So if it hits Alaska, the people in Alaska might think about it, but the people in other parts of the United States aren't going to think about it that much. So anyway, after 2004, my opinion is that Tokyo Electric really dropped the ball. Really, really, really dropped the ball. And so when people call the accident Fukushima or something like that, it's like it's really unfair to us in Fukushima because we're not the ones who dropped the ball. We're not the ones who were in charge of the nuclear power plant. I mean, the nuclear power plant could have been made safe, but it wasn't.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So do you want me to continue from there?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so on when I was living here, we moved here in 2006, and my son was little. Our son was little. And I didn't know we lived near a nuclear power plant. I didn't even think about it. We had been having earthquakes though. It wasn't like we just didn't have any earthquakes. And that was a huge mega. We'd had having earthquakes for a year, it wasn't the 60s anymore. Let's put it that way. In that video, they said, well, there aren't very many earthquakes and it's very stable. Fukushima is very stable. Well, things had changed. It wasn't stable anymore. We'd had an earthquake. Well, not we. Niigata had a very serious earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
The nuclear power plant there was okay. Yay. And then, we were having quakes. And if you look, and I have looked, I wrote a manuscript about before the nuclear meltdowns hit, before the quake hit. So I covered an entire year. And every month I looked at the actual earthquakes of each month. And so we had many, 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 many earthquakes at that same epicenter. Many, like over an entire year. And then you see them increasing. So in the first 10 days of March, we had many earthquakes. Now, Fukushima Daiichi wasn't run by Fukushima and it wasn't run by Tohoku. It was run by Tokyo Electric. So I don't know why they weren't doing anything, but I feel like they just didn't care like about what was going on here. I mean, if you think of this area as like the Appalachia of America, it was like I just don't think that they cared. If the plant had been near Tokyo, I think they would have done something. But because it was so far, they just didn't really care very much. So like we had many, many earthquakes at that same epicenter, and there was a really big one on March 9th. So did you know that?
I didn't.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that when I was sitting here on the sofa behind me. And so it was in the morning, and there's a big earthquake. So I get under the table, which is what you're supposed to do. This wasn't the mega earthquake. This wasn't the 9.0. This was a Wednesday earthquake. This was 2 days before the mega. So we had a big earthquake, and I got under the table. It was that big. And we had other earthquakes too, like small earthquakes, the kind where you just like, if you live in Washington State, do you feel earthquakes sometimes?
We seldom have earthquakes, but we are sort of on the lookout for the big one. And so
Yeah.
we will be ready for a 7 or an 8. Buildings are being torn down because they wouldn't survive. I should be strapping down all my bookshelves just in case.
Well, I think
Because yeah,
Washington, yeah, State and Oregon and California have probably learned a lot. Like they're
yeah.
like, we're gonna make it safe. I would hope anyway. Anyway, so sometimes there's an earthquake, there's like kind of like it moves a little bit. You're just like, oh, earthquake, and nothing changes. You're just like nobody thinks about it because
Mhm.
that's how many earthquakes we have in Japan. How many we've been having in Fukushima. We've been having so many that you just are like, oh, another earthquake. But the one on Wednesday, which is March 9th, that was big enough to get me under the table. That was big enough to make international news. So I checked the news, and there's a BBC says there was a 6 point something. What was it? 6 point something earthquake, and Tokyo was not affected. So that's what it said. It said Tokyo. The thing is, it wasn't a Tokyo earthquake. It was here. It was at the same epicenter as the mega quake, which hadn't happened yet. So then the next day on Thursday, there was another quake that I felt. And it wasn't just that, because there were other earthquakes that I couldn't feel, but they were more in the north, people could feel them. So there were all kinds of earthquakes going, and most of them were at somewhere around that epicenter. So you know there were a lot of earthquakes going on. And I'm not somebody who is an earthquake expert, but I feel like somebody should have put the dots together. Nobody expects a mega earthquake to happen. Nobody expects a mega tsunami to happen, but
Yeah.
they do happen. They do happen. And so on Friday, I had come home from work, and I had to take my son, who was ending his second year of elementary school. So he was 8 years old. And I needed to take him to the eye doctor. And so I was just sitting here on the sofa behind me. I was reading because I was waiting. And I thought to myself, well, when he gets home, I'm just going to run out with him, and we're going to get over there. We're going to get his eyes checked, like a mom does. So I wasn't doing anything. I was just reading. So I was back there, and I felt the earth shake. But you know what I thought? I thought, oh, another one. Another one. I got under the table, which is right here, my table next to me, which is a strong table. I got under the table, and when I was under the table was when I got scared, because it was really big.
Mm.
And that was really scary. And I was no longer thinking, oh, another one, because I knew it was different. I also thought, though, that it was the epicenter was in Fukushima City, because I couldn't imagine it being stronger than that. Like, I just couldn't imagine that it was like bigger. Yeah. So then I ran to my son's school, and he was okay. We didn't actually have a lot of earthquake damage to the buildings. First of all, we're not actually at the epicenter.
Mm.
We're not, we're far from the epicenter, even
Yeah.
though it was so bad. And so his school was okay, which I was happy about. And my husband was okay. And I didn't know about the nuclear power plant until my mom told me later. Like, we didn't have any news, right?
Mhm.
So we were talking and talking, and it became night, And my husband didn't want me to watch the news. I woke him in the middle of the night. He was like, don't look at the news. Because we didn't have electricity in the house, but we had gone to a place where there was a TV. He's like, don't look at the news. And I didn't know what he was talking about, but I was tired and I went back to sleep and I had a headache. So then the next day, though, we got our power back. And then my mom called and she said, are you worried about the nuclear power plant? And I said, no. Because that's what you say to your mom. I'm like, no, I'm not worried. And my head was like, what nuclear power plant? Like, I hadn't heard of that. I hadn't even heard of that at all. One thing is that there was so much going on. It wasn't one accident. It was
Mhm.
many, many, many accidents.
Yeah.
It was many accidents. So when people talk about fear or something like that, or you have to understand that it wasn't that we didn't know. There was so much we did not know. You can't look at things with a 2025 point of view. You just can't. Like to go back and put yourself into the frame of mind that people of Tohoku or Fukushima or anywhere had. I think it's impossible to do. You can't even watch a video because it's not this. Watching a video is not the same thing as the real thing.
Right.
Is there anything else? Like,
So
you have
so
questions? I can stop and get questions from you.
so hearing about the evacuation zones after
Wait. We haven't got to the evacuation
oh okay
zones yet.
then let's
Done
let's
there,
pause
wait.
because
The earthquake just happened. I
it
just
just
heard about
happened. So give it so you
Carl,
hadn't
how did you hear about the earthquake in Japan? Were you like in America?
well we didn't I mean I didn't really pay attention to I mean it's Japan, there are earthquakes there, yes, of course, but we didn't think about this, and I certainly wasn't. I only knew about nuclear energy from living near nuclear plants and from my family being somewhat connected to that industry, and so that was decades in the past for me. That was in the 90s when it was last time I had thought about that, and so we didn't think about it until it was a nuclear disaster.
But did you first hear it on TV? Did you turn on your TV and the TV or your computer or like how did you first? Do you not remember? Is that?
Yeah, it would have been on TV. It would have been on the cable news that I see. Oh, there's a nuclear disaster in Japan.
I don't think the first news was nuclear disaster. The first news was there was an earthquake.
Yeah.
That was the first news.
Yeah, and that is for an American, that's essentially not new. It's not surprising. It's not,
Really?
we're very accustomed to there's an earthquake in California, there's an earthquake in Japan. Those are things we hear about quite often.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't in the United States, so I don't really know. Like, I'm always curious what people in the United States thought at that time. Yeah, anyway, so you wanted to talk about the evacuations, right? Is that what you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, well, tell us your view of the timeline. How did you heard from your mother asking you, is what about the nuclear plant? And is
Yeah,
that
that was the first time I knew there was a nuclear power plant. I
Mhm.
didn't even know it was melting down. Like, I was like, those things are safe, Mom. Like, also remember, I didn't quite know the extent of the earthquake because I wasn't watching the news. And I mean, we were busy. It wasn't like we were just sitting around relaxing. We were really busy doing stuff
Mhm.
because we didn't have water. There was a lot of stuff that you have to do during a,
Yeah.
and we weren't even the worst hit part. So the people in the worst hit parts, I mean, it was horrendous for them.
Mhm.
So anyway, I first heard about the existence of a nuclear power plant. Although I will say that if I were born and bred in Fukushima, I would have known there was a nuclear power plant because you just know. But because I'd only moved here in 2006, I didn't know, as a foreigner. So anyway, my mom told me about that, but that wasn't the first thing on my mind that day because we didn't, because there was so much going on, like our house was a mess from things falling. And we were wandering out the neighborhood and the buildings. And my husband's relatives live further north, and their house needed help. Like their house was unsafe, so he had to go visit them and help them. And there's just a lot of things going on. A lot of people helping. One thing that people don't ever talk about when they talk about that disaster, how much everybody helped each other. It's like I feel like we were the heroes, and I don't mean just Fukushima, but the people of Tohoku did so much to help themselves. So whenever people are angry at us or act angry at us, it's like, no, we were the ones who were working hard and helping ourselves. So anyway, the quake hit on a Friday. And there was water being given out by the Japanese military, which is a self-defense force, on Saturday and Sunday because the shops were closed and didn't have water. And Monday, though, guess what? Our trash was picked up. I know. I was like, I couldn't believe it. On Monday, my husband went to work and I couldn't believe it. I was like, we just had a major. So all the necessary businesses, not the schools, not like, restaurants, but the necessary businesses were still functioning. So I was like, wow. And I said to my husband, why do you have to go into work? He's like, he has to clean up the place where he works. And so he went into work. It was really hard because he couldn't drive. We didn't have oil. I mean, gas. We didn't have gas.
Mhm.
People didn't have gas. It's like, oh my God, we don't have gas. We don't have gas. How do we get, there are all these things that happen with a disaster. So at that time, I started to hear the news about the nuclear power plant. And I'm like, hey, what's going on here? Like, I just didn't believe it. Like, they don't melt down. Those things don't melt down. Anyway, so I started hearing it and I didn't know what to do because I didn't know anything. Like, I'd never learned. I just didn't know. I didn't know what it meant. I wasn't, okay, don't like predict this, make it sound like I was ready to drink vodka and get rid of my radiation because I wasn't that like uneducated. Wasn't that uneducated, but I was uneducated enough to not know what it meant.
Mhm.
Even though I read a lot, I was like, where I never learned about this. I was like, and you know what? I don't think other people knew either. And you know what? I don't think even the experts knew. That's the thing. All of the experts who were supposed to know, they didn't know either. Nobody knew. And by experts, I mean, okay, so I'm reading Khan's book. And you asked me about the people at the nuclear power plant. They were working very hard. We know Yoshida and the men there, the workers there, were working very, 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 very hard. It was like a suicide mission, they called it. But once you left that, well, no, you didn't leave it, but once you go from the Daiichi site, the Fukushima Daiichi site, and go to their headquarters, which is in Tokyo, the management was very, 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 very bad. There was no communication. There wasn't communication from Daiichi to Tokyo management. There wasn't communication from Tokyo management to the prime minister, the government. And Khan talks about this. There was just no communication. So if there was no communication among these important people who are supposed to keep nuclear power plants running, how are we in Fukushima City or the small towns near the plant? How are we supposed to know what to do? We didn't know what to do. We had no idea. It's like we just didn't even know we didn't know what it meant. I didn't have a dosimeter yet. You know, I didn't even know what it meant. Which is why I talk it so much, and I know I'm really annoying about it, but it's like people need to know what's going on before it happens.
Mhm.
Or, and if there's, you can't just go through and act like it's never going to happen again. And yeah, so that's why I talk, because I want people to know what happened actually, as opposed to all the people who say, oh, well, this happened, that happened. It's like, no, that didn't happen. No, this didn't happen. I can tell you what happened. And we didn't know what was going on
Yeah.
in Fukushima. So you want to hear about the evacuations?
And when did you first hear that, that people were being evacuated? Like, did you know of people moving from, closer to, was it Date is the large city next to Fukushima Daiichi?
we weren't having communications with people outside of our neighborhood.
Oh.
So I didn't know what people were doing in other parts of Fukushima. I
Mhm.
was like, do I go or do I stay? What do I do? What do I do? I wasn't like, what do they do? I was like, what do I do?
Mhm.
You know, I had a son. So when people talk about nuclear power and a meltdown, something I noticed that the experts never talk about is that if you have small children, you're going to look at a meltdown very differently than if you're 65 years old.
Yeah.
And that's the way it should be.
Yep.
And that's the way we were. You know, we were smart enough to know that if you're 65 years old, it's totally different than if you're 7 years old, as far as a nuclear meltdown goes. Um, so people in Fukushima weren't selfishly going, me, that me. It was our children. You know, what should we do about our children? So I think everybody who evacuated that I know of had children, and they did so for their children's sake. They sent their children away, you know, or you know, like in my case, I went with my child, but my husband stayed here. And other people sent their children away if they could. Like it was on a case by case basis. We're in Fukushima City, so we weren't in the place where we were told to evacuate. We weren't forced to evacuate. Nobody said I had to evacuate.
Mhm.
Oh, but wait, the United States government said I had to evacuate.
Really? Was the evacuation different for, like, were you told by the US consulate that
Oh, I didn't find out until weeks later, but
oh,
Americans were supposed to evacuate because I'm an American, right?
mhm.
Okay, so um, when it first happened, Khan, the prime minister, who has a physics degree, by the way, he has a physics degree. I don't think his expertise was nuclear, but he's not like somebody who majored in like, you know, I don't know, something that's not physics. He has a physics degree. And anyway, so he wasn't getting good communication with the management of Tokyo Electric. Tokyo Electric is a private company. It's not like part of the government. So it's not like the Soviets. It's a private company. So he didn't really know what was going on in the nuclear power plant, or he says that in the book anyway. And he nobody was telling him because the management was so bad. Um, he they I think they first made it, I wrote it down, um 30 kilometers. Yeah, 30 kilometers at the outset. They made the evacuation zone 30 kilometers, like a circle, just your circle around Fukushima Daiichi. And I'm not in that 30 kilometers that Japan set. And it was 18 miles. So 30 kilometers, 18 miles. That was the original circle. And he said that he did it gradually because he didn't want there to be like a huge traffic jam. And looking back, he says he wouldn't have done it gradually if he could go back. At the beginning, they put it in a circle, but they realize now that that was a mistake because radiation doesn't go in a circle, you know. And I'd rather talk about my experience more
Yeah.
because I didn't live in that area.
Mhm.
I live further out, like 40 miles out, 40 miles away. And so the United States government was telling Americans who lived in in my area, and closer to the plant, that we should evacuate. Okay. And that they even had like an airplane or something, but I wasn't aware of that at the time. And I also didn't even know we were supposed to evacuate because I wasn't getting that news. And I didn't get an email from the American embassy either. So my dad called me that week because he'd been watching the news in the United States. Now, something you have to understand is that what time is it? I think we've gone over.
And yeah, as much
We've
time
gone
as you like.
over. We've gone over.
Well, we have been live for about 40 minutes.
What are you gonna do?
We should continue the story, and we will edit this back for everyone watching.
No, what are you gonna edit out?
Oh, pauses, stuff like this.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, so that week, the news in America was different than the news in America and Japan. The news in Japan was very like, there's trouble at the nuclear power plant, that kind of thing. Any questions? That kind of thing.
Right.
American news was like, it was like that. And so anybody wants to blame Japan about the evacuation, like, I don't know. If you're American, you need to start looking at yourself because anyway, so my dad called me. He did actually talk to my husband. He was thinking about our son.
Mhm.
He asked me my dad asked me, did they give you iodine tablets? And I was like, no. Huh? No. No. And then he talked to my husband. I think he told my husband that he wanted me to leave and my son to leave. So then we took a taxi to a bus stop and I got on the bus and the bus was full completely. And it smelled really bad because none of us had taken showers because we didn't have any water. And then I was taken to near my mother-in-law's home, which is on another part of Tohoku. And I lost my thing. So my husband is from here, and Fukushima is here. Fukushima's here, and my husband's from here.
Okay.
So I went here. This is where he's from. So she was. I know I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, nobody wanted those people from Fukushima," but she was very welcoming.
Mhm.
They were very. I mean, they weren't like, "Come back, you radiated." They were like, "Oh, go take a bath." I think she had a bath for me, so but they were very, 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 very welcoming. And I was also surprised when I got there how bad it was there too. Like I hadn't seen outside of Fukushima, and they didn't have stuff on their shelves. They didn't have gas. I was just surprised how wide. I didn't know how widespread it was for a long time. Yeah.
But that was the impact of the tsunami, right?
What do you mean? Well, no, we weren't impacted by the tsunami. I don't live near the coast. We're talking about the nuclear meltdown.
Right.
My
but
dad called because
so
of the nuclear meltdown.
Oh, okay, right. But when you talk about things being missing from the shelves, when you talk about just things in that distant part of Japan being impacted.
It's because yeah, because of the devastation. I mean, there was a triple disaster. It wasn't
Right.
only a meltdown. It was the quake, which was a big, big, big quake. It was the tsunami, and it was a meltdown. So when I was there, they said that the ships from Sendai City, which is the biggest city that was near the epicenter, they couldn't make the shipping around Tohoku. Do you understand? So a lot of the shipping was messed up. I mean, the train tracks, you can't run a train on a train track that's been devastated by an earthquake, right? So you couldn't ship by train. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't the nuclear meltdown that caused,
Right.
it was, I mean, yeah, not everything was a nuclear meltdown's fault. In fact, if anything, I get kind of annoyed when people are like, um, Fukushima gets all the attention. Fukushima gets all the attention. And the thing is, it's like, nobody in Fukushima is like, give us the attention. We don't make the news. We don't ever make the news. Like if you were to ask people in Fukushima, it would be very different from what the actual news is because those people writing those news articles aren't people who live in Tohoku. So nobody in Fukushima is going to say, oh yeah, the tsunami hit us worse than it hit the other parts because everybody here knows where the epicenter was. Everybody knows that Miyagi was just devastated. Everybody knows that Iwate was devastated. Everybody knows that Fukushima was devastated. Like, nobody is like, oh, it's only Fukushima. So, people who act like that don't come here from here. People who call it Fukushima don't come from here. If anybody uses that word as meaning the nuclear power plant or the nuclear disaster, because Fukushima is a prefecture.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah, kind of like Washington State,
Yeah.
Washington D.C.
Or New Jersey, like the New Jersey power plant, the New Jersey nuclear plant. You wouldn't you wouldn't call it the New Jersey plant. You would call it, the name. We give names. Unfortunately, it was named for your prefecture, and I don't know why TEPCO would do that, or if that was that may be the lesson for the future is don't name your nuclear
It is.
plants
Very much is.
in such
It
a
very
way.
much is. It's very much, I mean, Chernobyl is like the little town
Hmm.
that has nothing to do with the nuclear power plant. 3 Mile Island is what, an island? Yeah. Indian Point is what it named. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like
Yeah.
when people call the disaster, if they say Fukushima disaster, that's okay because it is a disaster in Fukushima. But if they just say Fukushima, Fukushima, after Fukushima, post Fukushima, and they're talking about the nuclear meltdown, that's really offensive
Hmm.
because this is a place. It's not it's, if it had been Indian Point nuclear power plant that melted down, you wouldn't say Indian, 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 would you? Like nobody would say that. So it's similar. Or, the World Trade Center. Nobody calls it world.
Or the
I
New
mean,
York attack.
huh?
Well, maybe, but that's so. I don't know. It is difficult to compare it, and it would be like saying the Washington nuclear disaster if we had one, or the Washington nuclear
Right.
accident for something
Columbia nuclear power plant.
we have a nuclear plant in the Tri-Cities. Richland, I believe, is the closest of the three, and it's Columbia Generating Station. Yeah.
Which is the name of what, a city? A town?
It's actually the entire region, so it would be like calling Fukushima Daiichi it would be like calling it the Tohoku nuclear power station, which
Well,
is
it's actually the TEPCO. In Japan, if you read the Japanese news, it's always called Tokyo Electric's Fukushima Daiichi.
Mhm.
That's the way it goes.
Yeah.
And virtually every single article in Japanese that I read says Tokyo Electric's Fukushima Daiichi.
Yeah. And ours would be Energy Northwest's Columbia Generating Station.
Yeah. So when people shorten it to just Fukushima, that's a quick way for me to tell the person doesn't know what they're talking about.
Right. Yeah. It is better awareness, I think, is wonderful, and I'm really happy that you're bringing us your perspective on this. We only had one question, so don't let me get us off track. Do you want to talk us about your experiences after in the aftermath of this triple disaster, and how has the region recovered, and what can you tell us about that?
When you say aftermath, you mean like the first few days or the years or?
I think because we've spoken at length about the onset of this disaster, don't leave out anything that you're compelled to share, but that's what people are interested in, I think, is what is the situation today
It's
in
fine.
Fukushima City?
It's fine.
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
come here. Spend money.
We-
Spend money.
Right? You should, because we just did the test. I like we're both at the same microsievert level. It is and you are familiar with the produce of your region, and how there'll be silly things like the ban on produce from Fukushima Prefecture, or fish from Fukushima Prefecture. But if you are at a market, like, how do you know that your food is safe?
I go for the cheapest. Okay, I have an important story to tell you.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
My husband's parents are farmers. They're not hobby farmers. That's their career. That's like the only thing they did. My husband is a farmer's son. So after that, she wasn't like, oh my God, it's from Fukushima. She was like, I hope nobody's gonna think I'm racist, but oh my God, it's from China. I don't want it's from China. And the reason why she didn't want food from China is because as a farmer, she didn't want the pesticides. Because I asked her, I was like, what's wrong food from China. She said because of the pesticides. That's what she told me. And she's a farmer. So, I mean, they use pesticides. My father-in-law uses pesticides, but I think that they think that like in some countries pesticides are used too much.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I went to the place here in Fukushima where they test the food.
So
But you have to understand that 2011 is very different than 2025. I mean,
yeah.
it-
So
it's
you
not the same at all.
you test food, and so you'll go to the checkout, and then what kind of
No,
testing?
no, no, no. There was a
Oh.
test. There's a testing center in Fukushima Prefecture. I think there's more than one, maybe.
hmm
But the one I went to is near Koriyama City, and they were really, really nice. And I went there, and you can take a tour in English or Japanese. And they led me down a hall where they were working. And by the way, this is tested by Fukushima. I
Mhm.
asked them, I said, "Who's doing this? Like the government, Japanese government, Tokyo Electric, Fukushima government's doing the testing." So they get food in and they test samples. And currently, or at least when I went, which is currently, all the food is safe. The only thing that you would really want to avoid would be like mushrooms, like wild mushrooms, wild,
Yeah.
because you know. But even now, I think wild mushrooms are probably safe.
Yeah.
But
And
something you wouldn't want to go to the exclusion zone and kill a boar and eat the boar because you don't know where the boar has been. I mean,
could have been in the because and I we each of us is probably familiar in our own way of there was a large amount of topsoil that was excavated in the exclusion zone, and even places.
oh, not just the exclusion zone where I live.
Yeah.
Yes, all over the city, all
Yeah.
over Fukushima.
And there may be some places in the mountains and in the forests which were not able to be excavated, and
They can't do it, and they don't do it in the mountains and the forest. They did it mainly where children play,
Mhm.
where people like parks, school grounds.
Yeah.
They did it there. Those were the places.
yeah,
They didn't do it everywhere, like the entire mountain, like because you can't do it on a mountain. That's too hard, right? So they would get, like, for example, a park. They would go to the park. They would take the top layer off, replace it, because the idea is to protect the children, so that if a child comes to the park and starts chewing on the dirt,
right.
there are people who are like, "Oh, that wasn't necessary." It's like, I don't know if it was necessary or not. Like, don't ask me.
It probably was, and I've watched things like Kyle Hill's visit to Fukushima Prefecture and the exclusion zone, and he talks with experts about you do have to be careful to identify contaminants in that area, and that is perhaps the easiest way to be sure that contaminants in that very sensitive population isn't an issue. And so I wouldn't say that it's unnecessary, but I have sort of an inside view of I have both survived a nuclear accident, and that was it was a Harborview medical facility. I was perhaps 2 miles away when a cesium source was accidentally cut open, and we had lessons learned from that accident, both the accident and the recovery from it, the response to it. There wasn't an evacuation; it was contained. They basically saran wrapped the whole building when they discovered that had happened. But it's not something that I'm going to say didn't need to happen. It is the response in terms of the remediation and the protection of the public is great. I don't know if I agree with your prime minister, but as my coworker and friend,
About what?
his evacuation plan. There might be
But
different
you have to
opinions.
realize that you can't say that in 2025. You have to go back to 2011, March 12th, and say to Khan, "This is what you should do."
When he
Because
didn't have the information.
that week, how was he supposed to know?
Yeah.
We we're not getting help. And I know you asked me that. You're like, well, they were helping you. They were fixing Fukushima Daiichi. But what I mean by help was we weren't being told like where we should evacuate, what we should do. And I don't think Khan knew either. There was Speedy, which is from the United States government.
Mhm.
And in his memoir, he says that he didn't get the memo on Speedy. I don't know if he's telling the truth or if he's not telling the truth. I don't know. But supposedly Speedy is quite good at it's American. You've
Mhm.
heard of Speedy.
I'm not familiar with the acronym or the sort of, this is the why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah. So anyway, well, I don't know much either. But at that time, the American government was measuring the radiation, and the Japanese government was doing its best too. But the American technology, I think, was apparently better because it had something called Speedy. So the American government knew more about where the radiation was settling than like Tokyo Electric or the Japanese government. So it isn't just in a circle. It's like, where does it settle? Where does it fall on your head? I feel like the only time you need to look at a nuclear meltdown is when it's that first week, or when it's actually like going into the air and it comes down with the rain or with the snow or with the wind and it falls on people's heads. And that's the most important time. So
Right.
now if I look this up, what does it matter what this says now? What mattered was in that week of 2011, because it was falling on top of us, you know. And whether people want to say it wasn't a big deal or not, I don't know. It's like, I don't want to argue about whether, because at that time we didn't know. It's like, if there's a nuclear meltdown in the United States and you want to say to people you don't have to evacuate, you can go ahead and say that. Like, say it if you want to. Like, I don't care what you guys say. But I mean, just keep in mind that when it actually happens, it's a very difficult thing to judge, because you may not know, you meaning the government, or, I don't know, the nuclear facility, they may not know everything. I don't know. And the people are going to do what the people are going to want to do, because, can you really tell an American go or don't go? Like, most Americans are going to evacuate if they want to evacuate.
Yeah.
And if they have the means to evacuate. And then there are going to be other Americans who are like, hell no, I'm not going to evacuate. No, you're not going to pry my house from me. And then there are going to be other Americans who want to evacuate, but they can't because they don't have a car, or they don't have the money, or there's no gas. So if there's a meltdown in the United States, when it comes to evacuations, I have a feeling people are just going to do what they want to do. So the best thing to do is get them the information, and provide transportation for those who don't have the transportation and who do want to evacuate.
Mhm.
Because ultimately it's going to be to each individual person, right? When there's really a meltdown, it's going to come down to each individual person.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to make somebody evacuate.
Yeah. Or to tell someone not to evacuate is
Yeah.
weird.
I think they managed it around the nuclear power plant because I think a lot of people were really scared. They didn't know. But another thing is, when you cut off everybody's electricity, it's like, and also that area there was a lot of destruction anyway from, the tsunami and the earthquake. But yeah.
So, why don't you tell us your memories of this and your experience talking about the triple disaster? Are you creating something from this experience? I want you to tell us about your literature, your what
Yeah.
you're creating and your attempts to get published, if you like.
Oh yeah, this has been a journey. Um, so I started writing a book about it in 2015, and I queried it and it wasn't accepted. And I wrote another book, a different book, and it wasn't accepted. And I wrote another book and it wasn't accepted. I can tell you what the storyline in each book was. The first one was based on a girl evacuating. And this was based on my own, like, I evacuated. So basically what in that book is telling what happened during those first days, those very first days. Like she's in class at school and the earthquake hits, and what she does during that time. And a lot of that's based on what actually happened here. And I said in Fukushima City because, I live in Fukushima City, so I know what happened here. And the second book was about a girl whose dad is American. And this is something that really happened to people. The dad was like, we're going back to America. I mean, you know that a lot of foreign people left Japan, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you know that. So in this, I mean, this isn't our life because I didn't leave Japan, but it's a fiction. It's fictional. So in this book, her mom is Japanese and her dad is American, and her dad says we're going back to Japan. I mean, to America. So they go back to America. So it's about her life in America. And in the book, she finds a hole in the ground, and it takes her. It's like a secret hole that's a fantasy. It takes her back to Japan, and she gets to Japan, and she finds out she's invisible. And so she's in Tokyo. She has to figure out how to get to Fukushima to see her mom again because she wants to see her mom. So that's the second book. And the third book is actually, I don't know. I feel like nobody has told the story before because a lot of people have told evacuation stories and they've told disaster stories, but nobody has told this story. It's set before the quake for one full year. And so it's the story of a group of kids from March or April 2010 to March 2011. And it's just their year. And, they have crushes on each other and stuff like that. And one thing I did from that manuscript was that I looked to see what earthquakes actually hit. And I can look at JMA, which is Japan Meteorological Agency, and see not only when and where they hit, where the epicenter was, but also what it felt like. So I could see like what it would have felt like in Fukushima Prefecture. So my character, for example, on January 1st, 2011, there was an earthquake. So he wakes up, it's in the morning. He wakes up, he's like, I felt an earthquake. And he goes to his grandfather who's praying for the new year. The grandfather says, yes, I woke up too with an earthquake. So that was a real earthquake that really did hit. It wasn't something I made up, to make it more dramatic.
Right.
So every single month, the kid feels earthquakes. Oh, there's an earthquake. There's an earthquake. 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 So it's leading up to, so you can see how many earthquakes we had.
Mhm.
I'm not making judgments on the nuclear power industry, but I think it's something kids need to learn because kids are going to grow up and they're going to work in nuclear power. So why not learn about it?
Yeah.
If kids don't learn about it, then I want kids to learn.
Yeah. And I think this would be for that group of kids, that would be a story of how they changed and adapted. And we've all been through COVID. We've all been through the lockdowns and the in America much more than other places. I hope that Japan managed that, and I expect Japan managed that much better than America. But for children who spent a year being homeschooled or Zoom schooled, it's quite different, and that experience changed lives. And I think that's similar to the story you're telling.
Well, when COVID hit, people learned a lot about illnesses, didn't we? Didn't we learn so much? And, so I hope to teach kids, what the actual experience here was. Because it's something I always want to remind people is that you can judge and what is it, Monday morning quarterback?
Right.
You can do that, but to actually be in the thick of it when it's happening is a totally different experience. So I'm talking about like that week, because the people of Fukushima didn't know what to do. And I don't think the government really knew what to do. And
Well, to close this out, your life fairly quickly returned to some semblance of normal. When did you move back into Fukushima City, or did you spend years away?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, we went back and forth because it wasn't that far away. We went back and forth. So I went there. I was like, oh, and I was so happy. I was gone. I was so happy. Um, and the thing is, part of you might be like, oh, the radiation wasn't hurting you. Why? But first of all, I didn't know that.
Mhm.
If it's true, I didn't know that. If it's true, I didn't know that. But another thing is that we were having so many aftershocks. So many. I was so glad to be away from the aftershocks. I mean, they were mentally disturbing how many aftershocks. They're just constantly, constantly. And so I was so glad to be away from all the aftershocks. So, and then I came back because I had to finish up a job. And it was during that time that I went to a cafe and I was having coffee there. And the man told me, "You're not supposed to be here." And I was like, "Wait, what? Yeah." And he said, "Well, because you're American. The Americans aren't supposed to be here." So he explained to me how the Americans were told to leave, to evacuate our area, not Tokyo, because I don't live in Tokyo, but our area. And I was like, "Oh, thanks for telling me." Bye. Like that wasn't what I wanted to hear,
Mhm.
you know. And so yeah, so if anybody wants to make judgments, I mean, Americans were just as, by American, I mean the government or whoever, they were just as like, get out of there, just as much as Japan. Japan was way calmer than America was. Way, way. I mean, Japan is like always like, you know, very like calm when it comes to news conferences.
It in part, and we had, we were under the same advice in America, as you as an American in Japan were, and that was from Greg Yetsko, who was the chair of the NRC,
Oh yeah,
uh,
I know he is.
and so I feel that it within the nuclear industry we're definitely not a fan of Greg because of many decisions he made that impacted um, the nuclear projects in Atlanta, and many of us feel that, and many of the advocacy as well feel that that harmed um, our ability to finish those projects on time, um, and so that that kind of a fear-based response, whether or not you support expanding nuclear energy, that fear-based response is a big factor in how we responded to the triple disaster in Fukushima.
Was it a fear-based response or was it let's make sure we got everything good response? Like, let's make sure that this is,
Mm,
there was a mistake that was made. Let's make sure that let's stop, make sure we don't have mistakes. Because I think the nuclear industry as a whole, not you, as a whole, can be really arrogant. And it's like, I don't know why he stopped, but I don't know if it's because fear or to make sure that everything was safe.
mhm.
Like, I would hope that you don't want a meltdown to happen.
No,
It's not, even if nobody dies, you still don't want it to happen.
right.
It's not like,
It's
oh,
very
nobody
expensive.
died.
It would be disastrous for an entire company for
It's
that to happen.
it's not a good thing. It's a worst nightmare scenario, even if nobody dies. I would never be like, oh, what I went through was so much worse than like the people who died in the fires of LA. I would never say that because it's not true. What I went through wasn't worse, but it's still not something anybody wants to happen. And that if it does happen, I would want people to be knowledgeable,
Yeah,
whether that means evacuating or not evacuating. I don't know.
yeah. But
And like I said, people are going to do what they're going to do if it comes
yeah,
to America.
I
I don't
I
think.
think my sentiment around a fear-based response has more to do with things like the agricultural bans and the responses from places like China and South Korea, were very much based in fear, I think.
Oh, and politics.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Well, if it can happen in Japan, it can happen anywhere because Japan usually dots its I's and crosses its T's pretty well. I mean, this is a country that thrives on order, but it makes mistakes. Japan, people get lazy here too.
Yeah.
Negligent.
Yeah.
I think a large part of it has to do with the fact that Tokyo doesn't care very much about Fukushima. So that's my own personal feeling.
Right.
Or at least it didn't.
And so there's a resistance, and from what I've heard from people involved in the response, not connected with my work, they said there's an expression, the sound of sucking teeth, or that when a worker will have to talk to management about, we don't think this is safe, or we need to make this change, and the management will say, and they respond in that way that the worker then knows, oh, you're not gonna go with my advice, are you? And I think that is a part of the work culture that, as a professional, I hope we have defeated in the U.S. industry. And I hope that we see that attitude defeated everywhere, because it leads to mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Well, it has been a little bit over an hour of content, so ending on a high note, thank you so much for your stories and your contributions, and maybe we could come back in the future. It's hard for us. It's a holiday for me in the United States, working on a government contract, and so I'm thankful to have this opportunity to speak with Amy Lang Kawamura, resident of Fukushima City, and take in her reflections of the triple disaster in Fukushima in 2011. So thank you, everyone, for your attention and contributions. This has been a special episode of the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. You can find us on YouTube at Eco-Modernist1 or the Eco-Modernist Channel. You can find us on Facebook at the Eco-Modernist Society of North America, and online at ESNA.earth. That's ESNA.earth. Please support us on Patreon at the Eco-Modernist Channel, and you can also find these programs rebroadcast on my personal Twitch at Soyaddle or Soyaddle.tv, and on my personal X.com account, Carl Alex Pauls. So thanks everyone again for your input and taking in Amy's story. Remember, emissions first, peace and justice will follow.
Emissions or omissions?
I want to speak to you about a new organization called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. Eco-modernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in general. Ecology-based modernism is the most direct way to define it. Eco-modernism as a philosophy is described in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto. We believe humanity should not be rejecting technological progress, but rather separate our impacts from nature through the responsible use of technology and urbanization. Urbanization is an unstoppable worldwide trend and the best solution to many environmental problems. It offers sustainable development for the human population and is a historic antidote to both deforestation and species extinction as humans move away from using wildlife as their protein source. Vertical, urban, high-rise architecture minimizes the use of land, resources, and energy, enabling walkable cities that facilitates the more efficient use of mass public transit as well. It must be emphasized that our support for technological solutions is definitely not about defending industrial polluters, nor does our defense of technology imply that we just need to sit back and let things take care of themselves. To the contrary, we believe that humanity is at a crossroads that severely threatens our future on this planet. I hope by now you understand the worthiness of our cause. Eco-modernism is really only a philosophy at this time. I want to talk to you about the necessity of turning it into a movement, which will be part of the larger environmentalist movement. For it is only through our presence and participation that there can be any hope of moving environmentalism in the right direction. Our aim is not to divide the environmental movement, but rather to multiply its numbers with the incorporation of many scientific and educational communities that is working to both build chapters of eco-modernist societies and support our growth worldwide.